Welcome back, everybody. This week in America and the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Great to have you with us on the program tonight. You can follow us on Twitter at TWIA Radio. That's TWIA Radio. And, of course, website thisweekinamerica.us. As mentioned, our guest on the program tonight is Martin Simmons. He's a glider pilot, historian, and retired professor, philosophy of education from Adelaide University in Australia. He's written a couple of novels, a number of books, but a couple of novels we'll be talking about on the program today. One is Jenny Rat, the other is Cities, and Martin is joining us via Skype from Australia. Martin Simons, thank you for joining us on the program.
Well, hello, Rick. It's nice to see you.
Same here. It's great to have you with us on the program. So much to talk about, and let's talk about the novels. You are a retired and educator. Well, you've done a little bit of everything, and I mentioned in the beginning. I'm going to start with the second novel because I'm fascinated by this. Basically, what may be life like in 1,000 years. Tell me how that came about, because both of these novels are different. One is dealing with some emotions, and we'll talk about that. This is dealing with emotions, but set 1,000 years from now. How did that whole idea come about?
Well, that was partly an emotion on my part. I began to get very sick of the politicians talking about whether or not climate change was real, and if it was real, who was causing it, and trying to find somebody to blame for the problem, and not doing a damn thing about it. In fact, the idea was, well, suppose it really does get a lot worse, which I think is quite likely. What is the human race going to do? And my answer to that was, well, the planet that we're living on is 2/3 covered with water. So a fairly obvious thing for people to do is to go and live on the water. And there are already these enormous cruise liners which go out for weeks at a time and cruise around the oceans. And I thought, well, let's really do it properly. Why don't the big cities like Shanghai, New York, London, all those big cities which are on the coast already, why don't they start building things that will allow them to live on the water? So I imagined a situation 1,000 years from now, as you say, where all the big cities that used to be on the coast have made enormous rafts. They're miles and miles in area, and they built their cities on the rafts, and they're floating about in the ocean, navigating by using the currents.
So these are basically floating cities you envision like 1,000 years from now.
Yes, that's right. And partly because of the climate change, the life on land has virtually broken down. So there is no real cultural life on the land at all. There are a few savage tribes surviving, but all the civilized people are on the water. And they're living in fairly disciplined, well, very strongly disciplined conditions, rather like being a crew member of a Navy ship. They have to do what they're damn well told. And there's a young girl living on one of these rafts. She's actually a Sydney girl, an Australian. And she has the idea of living in the water, not so much living on the water as the rafts do, but swimming in the water like a fish. And she wants to do that. The only way she can do that is to have some sort of method of breathing underwater. And she hears about a rather weird old woman who's a very brilliant scientist who can adapt a human being and give her gills so she can become a sort of mermaid. And she decides that's what she would like to do. And that's the beginning of the story.
The book is called Cities. It's available for a download, an ebook at Amazon, BarnesandNobleOnline.com. Martin Simons, our guest on the program. His website is very simple. It's martinsimons, SIMONS.com.au. If you go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, you will be able to link on to Martin's website. You know, what's interesting is, in people that have read the book and the reviews, and it's been very well reviewed, you've got what they call a very eventful narrative going there as well. How difficult was it once you decide, okay, we're going to have like these floating cities and each one will have its own characteristics? How was it then to try to draw out personalities 1,000 years from now? Was that difficult to come up with the narrative?
Well, the narrative was easy. I had a lot of fun doing that. Uh, the characters, I think, are perhaps the weaker point. I wouldn't say in that book anyway, that I spent a lot of time thinking of the characters. The girl herself, who is the centre of the story, she's quite a lively girl. The old woman, the witch, or she calls herself a witch, she's a character too. I think for the rest of it, I have to admit, they're not particularly exciting people to meet. The story is the main thing as far as I'm concerned. I had the idea too that maybe if people take it a little bit seriously, they'll start thinking about what are we going to do if the climate change really does happen, and if I think we're too late to stop it. It would be marvelous if we could do some marvelous things like waving a magic wand and
Right.
stop it happening. I don't think that's going to happen. So I think we will have to go and live on the water.
Well, it's interesting because one of the reviewers said that you're looking for something off the beaten path with fodder for thought and mental discussion. And is that the
Yes.
philosopher in you where, okay, I'm going to lay this out there and I hope people think about this and take a real hard look at it and analyze where we are and where we're going?
Well, I hope you're right. Of course, I can't keep philosophy out of my stuff. There is a bit of philosophy in this book, and there's a lot more in the other one when we come to talk about that. But yes, I think it's high time we did some serious thinking and make some serious moves in that direction. I would like to see it.
The book is called Cities. That's the second novel. And if you go to Martin's website, you'll see all sorts of books there. The second novel. The first one is called Jenny Rat. How far would you go to help someone reclaim their life? A fascinating concept. Two people sort of struggling. Tell us basically what the book is about.
Well, it's about a young man in the first place who is, although he doesn't entirely understand himself, he is desperately lonely and in need of human companionship. He's developed an engineering business, which means he can work at home with his computer and hardly ever go out, hardly ever meet anybody. And he's so fascinated by his work that he can bury himself in it. And one night, he has some sexual urges which he can't completely bury, and he starts employing a call girl. And one night they're going out of the house, with the call girl's on her way home, and they stumble across at first they think it's a young boy in the gutter outside the house, obviously terribly ill and desperate. And they take her in, or the young man takes her in. The call girl isn't a bit in favor of this. She's a hard nut. She doesn't want anything to do with it. But he takes this girl in, gets her to hospital, and begins to feel terribly responsible because he saved her from death. In effect, she's been abused since childhood, and she's in a terrible state. And he feels responsible. He saved her life. What sort of a life is she going to live? That's the beginning of the story. They go on later, or she decides, the girl, when she eventually recovers with his encouragement, she decides she's going to live with him. And that's where the problems begin. But it's also, in the long run, it's hopeful. I will say this, some of the reviewers who've looked at it have found it impossible to read beyond the first 50 pages. And they write their review on that basis. I got this book and I can't read it anymore because it makes me feel so miserable, or it's so shocking. There are some four-letter words at the beginning, which I think you would expect from the context. What they don't persist with is the story that develops, where they do, in fact, help one another to improve and to live better.
Both of the books, Cities and Jenny Rat, the book we're talking about now by Martin Simons, rated very highly at Amazon. And one of the reviews there, too, in talking about that, addressing that, said, ultimately, it's optimistic. So if you stay with the book, it sort of progresses and it's optimistic before the book is completed. Tell me where the idea came for this particular book and these two characters.
It's very hard to say exactly, but there were some cases in Adelaide, which is where I used to live before I came to Melbourne, There was a case where a girl in her teens apparently chose to leave home and go to live with a man. And this became a court case in the end, of course, because they accused the man of abducting the girl. She denied it. She said that's where she wanted to be and it was up to her. It did raise all kinds of problems. I thought, well, that's an interesting story, but I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting than just a court case and a police case. What would happen if you were a young fellow and you found a girl in distress? What would you do? And the answer to that came fairly easily. You would try to save her and get her to hospital. But is that all? Would you stop there, or would you feel obliged to go and visit her in the hospital, see what was wrong, try and do a bit better? I mentioned also the young girl, when she does recover, which she does with his help, she goes through a terrible time in recovery. It's not easy for her. But as she recovers, she discovers, or he discovers, that she has a brilliant talent as a sculptor. She wants to make sculptures. And he happens to be a skilled woodworker. That's the only thing he does that isn't work for him. He has all the tools and the equipment that a sculptor might need. So she starts becoming a sculptor. And that's where, in the end, of course, she's going to go. She's going to be a brilliant artist. But he didn't know that at the beginning.
Well, that book is available as well, ebook at Amazon. If you go and check out Martin Simons, Simons, at Amazon or Barnes & Noble online. You can also go to our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and link on directly to Martin's website, which is martinsimons.com.au. Time going by rapidly. A couple minutes left in the program. You've written a number of books on gliders. I know you've written a book on aerodynamics, and I understand you're going back now, making some revisions in that book because even in the last 5 years, things have changed. We were talking before the program about drones. People are sending out drones in the neighborhood. Pizza places are delivering pizza by drone. We're really seeing a dramatic change in this.
Yes. Not in the aerodynamics so much, but there has been some very brilliant research done at the University of Illinois. I have to say their full title. It's the University of Illinois at Champaign, I think. The young, well, he's not so young now, but the professor there is Michael Selig. And another professor I've been in touch with is Mark Drayler, who's at MIT. And they've been very cooperative, and they've sent me some of the results of their recent research, which means it's going to be difficult for me, but I'm going to have to try and rewrite several chapters to incorporate this new material. I also heard, I'm not sure if this is true, that in Colorado, the authorities are rewarding people with shotguns who go out and shoot down the drones, the toy drones that people.
I had heard that. Yes, I had heard that.
You did, right?
I think there's truth to that. Yes.
It's a bit alarming, but anyway, in the Jenny Ratt book, there is more philosophy. There are several. This call girl at the beginning of the story, she's not a stupid girl. She's been to university. She's taken up her profession by choice, or at least she says so. But she read some philosophy. So the first thing that happens when a problem arises, she starts getting the young fellow to read some philosophy, which he's never done before, doesn't understand it, but he has a go. And it does influence the story. Later on, when the books progress quite a lot further, they come across some other philosophers and they get into arguments with teenage friends about them too. So there's more to it than just a story about love and disaster.
Well, and it's interesting because in addition to writing, I understand you do your own illustrations. I mean, you are a man of many talents here.
Well, it's nice of you to say so. One thing I cannot do is cook.
That's why they're microwaves. I'm sure you have microwaves in Australia.
I can boil an egg.
We got just a minute or so left in the program. Talk about your fascination with gliders.
Well, that began when I was very young. I always was interested in flying. This is way back in the 1930s we're talking now. When I was 9 years old, a friend of mine took me to a gliding club, which was near where we lived. This was in England, in Derbyshire, near Sheffield. And I saw gliders for the first time there, and I was totally fascinated by them. Beautiful aircraft flying in the sky silently, and brilliant people flying them, at least so I thought. And when I went home after that, I read everything I could find about gliding and gliders. A few weeks later, the Second World War broke out, and there was no civilian flying allowed in England at that time during the 6 years of the war. But as soon as the war was over, and by which time I was 16, I was able to join the local gliding club, the same one that I'd visited, and I started learning to fly there. And one way or another, I've been at it ever since.
Do you remember what your thoughts in the first couple of times you were out there? I mean, I'm a nervous flyer. I like to hear the engines. If there's any deviation in the sound of the engines, I get nervous. I can't imagine being out there and not hearing engines. What was it like the first couple of times you were up in a glider?
Well, I was terrified.
Okay, good. I'm glad you admitted that.
But it wasn't the lack of the engine. Well, I got over that, and I love it now. The thing, of course, about the engine is that if you're in a glider, you don't have to worry about the engine failing. And you can, if you're any height at all, if you're 5,000 or 6,000 feet above the ground, you can go 20 or 30 miles from there and find somewhere to land if you have to. So it's not dangerous. It's less dangerous than flying these powered aeroplanes, little ones. I think we have a pretty good accident record. There are accidents, of course, but not many.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. We certainly will be back and check in with Martin. Martin Simons has been our guest on the program. The books we're talking about is 2 novels. Jenny Rat, his first, Cities, his second. You will enjoy them. They will get you to think. The books are available as ebooks at Amazon.com. Also available at BarnesandNobleOnline.com. And information at Martin's website, which is Martin Simons, simons.com.au. And information at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. You can log on and to link right directly to Martin's website. A lot of interesting information on the website as well. And the one thing I really envy, besides all the talents you possess, we're getting ready for fall and winter. Down in Australia, you're getting ready for spring. I envy that. Enjoy the spring season down there.
Thank you very much, and I hope you go skiing or something over the winter.
I'm going to stay in by the fireplace where it's warm, a little hot chocolate. That's the plan for me. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, everybody. You've been listening to This Week in America and the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network.